and welcome to this program, Pan-African Friday, again for this week. I'm sure last week we had a very interesting discussion, and for the last 3 or so episodes we were handling the issue of sanctions. Now we're talking about sanctions, we're mostly talking about what has been done mostly to the African countries, and we saw from the list that most of the sanctions that have been imposed on the countries since the establishment of the UN Security Council, we have had over 37 countries, and most of these countries definitely other than Iran and North Korea and a few others. Most of the countries are African countries. So today we are looking at the position of Africa in the UN. Africa in the UN. We are having the 79th UN General Assembly this year, and actually this time as we speak, we are in the third week of the second week, we are going to the third week of the United Nations General Assembly. But from this assembly, what do we expect as Africans? What are the take-homes from this gathering of the countries of the world? Do we expect anything new? Are we expecting anything different, or it is going to be business as usual? And of course, background to add to that, Uganda is one of the countries that have been advocating for the renewal of energies in the UN, but also to have some reforms within the UN so that Africa can also be on the table of men. We don't have to just go sit and listen to the rhetorics of the UN, but rather we also need to have something that we are coming out with from the UN. And before we do that, there's a video that we shall be listening to, and once we are done with the viewing of that video, that is talking about the UN, the US state ambassador to the UN is talking about what reforms US expects from the UN, and also we'll also hear Ambassador Chilombo, the friend of Rugarama here, talking about the same. Then we shall take off from there. In the studio, I have Ndugu Rugarama, and also I have Ndugu Wich, who will be discussing with us on this topic. And now, before they come on screen, let's hear what the US ambassador to the UN is advising, and then also hear what the former ambassador of African Union to the US will be talking about the UN, and then we can begin our discussion from then.
Changes that affect all of us and disproportionately affect Africa. That is why, in addition to non-permanent memberships for African countries, the United States supports creating 2 permanent seats for Africa on the Council. It's what our African partners seek, and we believe this is what is just.
That this issue has been on the table, ongoing for, like you said, 80 years. If we are going to right the wrong, why can't we just right this wrong once and for all? If Africa is going to become a member of the UN Security Council, a permanent member, they must have the full rights just like the other 5 members, which means they must have veto power. Inviting Africa to the table and then asking them to remain mute is an insult not only to the African leaders, but it is an insult to 1.4 billion people.
Discussion. The US ambassador to the UN is saying US is supporting that 2 positions are created on the UN Security Council, and that Africa should have full powers on the UN Security Council by having 2 positions. So of course we shall come to that. If there are 2 positions, then how are they shared alongside the rest of Africa? But and also, and the ambassador, the Iron Lady, according to Varama, is saying, let's have those 2 positions. It has been overdue, but we shouldn't be just two positions like now we're having this elected positions where you go there, you sit and watch and you cannot take a decision, that Africa should also have the veto powers like any of those countries. Because if there's a population, we have the biggest population, and then you just go and sit and watch. So these are the issues that we are looking at today. Yes, the UN is progressing today. We're going the third week of the UN. What do we expect to bring out of this UN? And President Museveni has also been very cardinal on that. Say there must be reforms in the Africa and in the United Nations, because if we cannot do that, then Africa is just going to be escorting others to go and listen to rhetorics as they speak, and then we come back empty-handed. Gentlemen, you are welcome to the program. And Ndugu Rugarama, you're welcome, and Ndugu Awich, you also are welcome. I will begin with you, Ndugu Rugarama. We are going directly to this issue of the Africa in the United Nations.
Thank you so much, Comrade Mututa, and good morning to my brother, Comrade Awich Pora, our Director Foreign Affairs at NRM Secretariat. And good morning to our esteemed viewers of UBC TV. Like you correctly put it, we are now having the 79th session of the UN, meaning that for the last 78 times UN has been sitting to deliberate. What is of interest is that in majority of the cases, unless of course there is something burning and some consensus and agenda is adopted in that manner, every head of state is usually given some time, 10, 15 minutes, I think at most. This time they were given 15. This time around, it was 15 minutes. He's making it worse. And I remember at one time our president saying, you know, I cannot come all the way thousands of miles to speak for only
5 minutes.
For 5 minutes. And I think, in my opinion, that what he presented was one of the best presentations that he has ever made at such a forum. Anyhow, the UN is an organization where membership is for all the independent, recognized countries on the globe. When you are a full, you cannot gain a full membership if you are not an independent, recognized country. And over time, there are a number of various crisscrossing issues that have been discussed in that body. This time around, what I seem to see is that every country has been coming with her own issues to present to the world. But I must point out that of great interest that almost every country has talked about is the escalation of the conflict in the Middle East, and especially the activities of Israel, not just against Hamas in Gaza. I wouldn't even say Hamas, against the Palestinians in Gaza, but now also, I didn't watch the news in the morning, but I have a feeling if they have not yet directed the ground troops to enter into Lebanon, then anytime soon they are doing it. And all this they have been doing willy-nilly, without the Security Council, because ultimately it falls to the UN Security Council having to rein in, and they usually don't, because America will certainly veto, Britain will veto, France will veto, probably China can be a little bit neutral or maybe support, and Russia. It has been like that. So I'm saying that almost every country at the UN General Assembly has been talking about the excesses of Israel, of course, minus United States of America and a few Western Europe. There has also been talk at the UN about the Ukraine being given support.
Of course, I think we'll come to that, what the backdrop of this particular...
but your issue was, I think, Africa. What I have seen on African continent, unfortunately, is that I have not seen so many countries, for instance, talking about the unfortunate unfoldings in Sudan.
Exactly.
Although that is another massacre, that we have got well over 8 million people displaced. We have got well over 11 million people at the risk of going hungry, and others are already hungry. And we seem not to be giving it the kind of energy. I have seen, of course, growing concerns about Cuba. A number of leaders have talked about lifting the economic embargo from Cuba. But on the African continent, I have seen isolated leaders talk about the happenings in Sudan, which is unfortunate. It should have been a very strong voice.
Exactly.
There are few also voices on DRC, the happenings especially in the eastern DRC. And generally speaking, I think that what UN has done, or is in the process of doing, is, as has been the case, not to give Africa the kind of attention that it deserves.
Yeah, true. Ndugu Awich, do we look at it? Are we expecting anything new from the assembly, the 79th assembly, as compared to the past?
Well, the assembly, you can expect something in terms of resolution, which is normally kind of routine. But I think it would be fair if we discuss a topic like UN, and especially when we mention something about Security Council or reform in UN, it would be fair that we make our Africans, because this is a Pan-African program, would fair that we make them understand this concept. Because sometimes we talk in generalities and everybody mentions, you see vehicle UN, you see officers UN, you see on the news
exactly.
UN. So it is good that we make people understand. For example, it is worth mentioning that the United Nations was born after the Second World War. And Second World War ended in 1945. Before that, there was a similar organization called League of Nations. The League of Nations had its headquarters in Switzerland. When UN came out of League of Nations, like say OAU, AU coming out of OAU. So League of Nations had its headquarters in Switzerland. I was lucky to have worked in the office which used to house League of Nations for 8 years. I worked there for 8 years because it is currently the headquarters of human rights. Now, if you take from a position that United Nations was born in 1945, and you are talking in relation to Africa, you quickly know when did Africa actually become states that could be members. We know that in history, we know that it is only Ethiopia and Liberia which was not colonized. And therefore, ideally, those should have been the first two members
automatically
to go to United Nations. Egypt became independent in 1922 or something. Therefore, Egypt would qualify to take a seat. Now, Liberia did not, because Liberia was formed by former slaves who were brought back from America.
From Americas.
And that is why their capital city became Freetown. Freetown was a town which was bringing slaves for freedom. But just a minute, it's something you would wish to know on human nature. Do you know that the slaves who were brought from America to be free in Freetown ended up enslaving the Africans they got?
They found there.
And it is actually part of the war which caused civil strife in Liberia. I said, you guys were brought from slavery to freedom. And because for them, they were educated, they had been exposed, and they had money. And that is why they even used the dollars.
I think, and without cutting your point, or continue from there, I've been sharing this even with the Rugaramas here. I said, if Africans were put in the position where the West is, they would have been terrible than the issues that we're complaining about.
That is another debate. But what I wanted to say here is to bring the historical context of Africa, and they are taking seats in UN.
UN, yes.
So ideally, we would have expected the two countries which were not colonized, Ethiopia and Liberia, to take seats first. Then the Egyptians who got independence. Then countries like Ghana, 1957.
Sudan.
Then Sudan also.
Was before.
Before. Sudan was also before. Then the rest of the Africans in 60s. So maybe somebody would argue, rightly so, that how do you expect an institution which was formed in 1945 when African states were not there to have to be fitting in the current contemporary situation? Because when it was formed, Africans was not there anyway. So what people are saying now is that immediately you bring in new members on the table, you definitely have to reform the body. Because it was formed at a time when these people are not there. They didn't have a say, they didn't have a voice, they didn't even participate in the negotiation of the instrument, and therefore they could not have a voice like in the instrument that created it. The instrument created a very strong body called the UN Security Council. Now, this UN Security Council couldn't have put Africa because Africans were not there.
Not there and was not expected.
Even if Ethiopia, Liberia, and Egypt were there, they couldn't. Therefore, even if you form a company now, an ordinary company of 5 people, and then you bring in 40 more people in the company, you will of necessity have to change the articles of association or the memorandum. Because the articles of association, the memorandum, came at a time when these members were not there. And therefore, we could forgive the architect of the UN plus whatever they did because we were not there. But now that we are there, what do? Now, I go back to the Security Council, yes, which is a birth of an instrument which created the UN.
The UN.
This body, and I think when we are talking of reforms, we are not talking of reform in the General Assembly.
No.
We are talking of reform in the Security Council. Because the General Assembly, you just join as a member, and that is all. For example, South Sudan was among the latest to join recently. So all sovereign states are expected to join, although we still have cries from a Pan-African perspective that the Sahrawi Republic has not yet been allowed to join. Morocco seems to think Sahrawi is part of Morocco. African Union took a position that Sahrawi is independent, and to that effect they have a seat in African Union. Yeah. So we are asking, if this country have a seat in African Union as a full state, a full member, why don't they have at the UN? But because of the global dynamics there, they have had a seat in Addis Ababa and having embassies all over the continent, all over the world actually, including Sweden and Uganda, but they don't have a seat at the UN.
At the UN.
Possibly if somebody was to talk about that, would not in a real sense be called a reform, but just how to accept Sahrawi to take their seat.
Practical.
But yes, to the Security Council, it has 15 members. And I also want to say that what the American ambassador is saying is not creating 2 positions for Africa in the UN. It is a creating position in the Security Council. So you need to make that clear. Because right now, Africans sit in the Security Council. Uganda has just ended its seat. You remember the other time?
The rotation.
Yes, when Right Honorable Rugunda was ambassador, Uganda was a member of the Security Council.
As a
But
permanent member.
an ordinary member of the Security Council. I happened to have been in New York at that time, so I attended some of the sessions. So, the reform that we do envisage, and if you're talking back to the 79th session, if there is anything to get by, to come back home, I would expect that the General Assembly would have mentioned something about the reform or accepted it. What is it about this Security Council? The danger with Security Council is, first of all, it is the mandated body to take global security issues. But what worries us is, you have like 3 Africans now sitting, which they elect Africans for 2 years.
2 years.
Yes, Uganda has been there recently. But what is troubling is that in the formation, they gave this body 5 permanent members. That is China, USA, Russia, France, and UK. What is this 5 permanent meant to do? The 5 permanent members means if an issue comes up, they should veto. For example, if you table a motion in the Security Council that nobody should attack Libya, that you want a resolution of Security Council that Gaddafi is a president, don't attack. Now, these 5 permanent members hold a power called veto. United States, for example, can say, we veto, meaning we reject. And a no in that vote by 1 kills the motion. So the rule there is a rule of unanimity.
Exactly.
Unanimity means, the opposite of unanimity is consensus. Unanimity means everybody must say yes.
Yes.
Or at least nobody should say no. If a member wants to say no and he walks out, that is called abstaining. If he abstains and there's no, then the motion passes. But should one say no, then the motion dies. So if you presented a motion to say, let us not attack Libya, and US said no, then the motion of not attacking Libya dies. It means Libya should be attacked. Now, we are saying, if you formed this instrument in 1945 before we were born, and now you have 54 members of African Union there, surely an organization which was formed before 54 members joined needs a reform to cater for the new 54 members.
Exactly.
And therefore we need members who can also say no. Okay? Because now this no thing really kills. For example, if you wanted to save a situation in Middle East and somebody says no, finished. Again, on top of what I want to say is, apart from excluding 54 members who were not there during the birth, some people are even questioning how some members got to the 5. For example, France. People have been asking the logic, why would France be a member or permanent?
It was a colonial power.
Because France, by the formation of during Second World War, they didn't fight. Hitler had conquered France. He had even put RDC there. France was a government in exile. Exactly. France was a government in Netherlands. France was a government in UK. Maybe. So we're wondering, how did they get the power to become a member of Security Council?
What they are looking at was that, of course, the backdrop is that they looked at 5 members who were the problems, who were part of the problem of the Second World War.
Then why not bring Germany?
Exactly. One would wonder, why would you leave out a country like Germany? Yeah. But also, I think the reasoning then is that, like you did put it, and for the benefit of our viewers and of course who are following us, that they would envisage that there will be another group of black people who will be joining us at the table. And even after Africa joined, it has been like on the periphery, like until recently when they started this the rotation of the African membership. And of course, like Ambassador Chilombole was saying, you are a member there, but you are just closer just to hear. and know and see what is happening, but you don't have much power to do that.
Exactly. This is what I'm saying. You form a company with a good intention, 5 of you. Along the way, the company picks up and you bring 54 people. You definitely have to consider revisiting your articles of association
exactly.
and memorandum of association to cater for the new members. That is it. So, but I was still saying that some people even question the rationale of having France, because France did not fight anything. France was conquered by German to the extent that Italy had put RDCs in German. So
France.
he said, how do you? Anyway, whatever they did it at that time. So the point now is, with this expansion, thank you so much you formed the UN. Thank you, you didn't know Africans were there in 1945. But the 1960s up to 70s, we had many African countries becoming sovereign, to the point that we are now 54. We don't think that that company should be the same now.
That's true.
Actually, as a matter of fact, my opinion there is that by the time, because you remember what Ndugu Pora has just mentioned, in the 60s, just immediately after even slightly, by the way, before the OAU, when we got the number of African countries gaining independence, and in the phase after the very first 1963, the phase of the 60s and the 70s, when a number of countries African countries were gaining independence, there were a number of them, to the extent that that lot, if for instance it was an inconvenience for the Security Council to adjust just because maybe one new member has joined the UN, we had a number of them. There should have been reform at that time. And remember that we have not just started talking about reforms. China, which you see here, didn't start as a permanent member of the Security Council. They campaigned, and because they had shown themselves to be a force, and those who were at the forefront, of, who were actually members, they saw it, they could not resist the power that was emerging. And China also, and you remember they had the support of Africa. One of the blocks that supported the Chinese taking up the permanent role at the Security Council was Africa. We now turn around and say, by the way, we paid you a very good package, and we think now this is the time for you to pay us back. Maybe somebody should understand. What is it that, because it is this veto thing that we are talking about, let me tell you, there have been vetoes in that Security Council, and still decisions have been taken. There is a veto, and like for instance, you remember, in the case of Iraq, there was a veto. Did it stop Iraq being dismantled the way it was dismantled? You see, we have had vetoes on the excesses of Israel, especially from Russia and China. Has it stopped America unilaterally doing what it is doing? The problem here is, and of course, even before I go into the problem,
been a veto
yes,
on the attack on the Libya, like he was saying.
There was abstinence. China abstained, even why they don't know why they really abstained.
Exactly.
In my opinion, I think they should have.
They should have vetoed.
Should have. But of course, when you look at what they are doing now, they are also part of the team that is routing the resources of Libya. You know, and that tells you, therefore, what this veto power is used to achieve. Now, there are two things very quickly that Comrade Mtuta will permit me say. That this veto and the power of the Security Council, they actually created the prefect. The Security Council is the prefect of the world. And it does not only stop at vetoing and vetoing decisions of others, and therefore the decisions cannot be taken. No. Where there is a veto, some countries, permanent members of the Security Council, have taken unilateral decisions and have said, for us, we shall go it alone. And they have achieved what they want to achieve. At the end of the day, therefore, if we must balance power, to realize and accept the fact that here we are living in a global village. We are all on a planet called Earth, Africa, because we are not negotiating anything new. Remember that the African countries took a decision in this country in South Africa. What is the name again? Swaziland. They adopted a compact of how Africa as a continent must join the Security Council, and they took a decision that they must have two veto power. Their power should be twice, not one, like these others. And so it is not just a proposal.
As an affirmative.
It is not just a proposal that they are now going to bring. No, they decided on it, and their views and decisions are very well known by the Security Council. Now, I do not have to be a Jewish prophet to say this, that it is giving a Security Council a hard time and exposing them for the liars and of course conspirators that they are to see through the demands of Africa, because they know what it means. I can assure you that the purpose of the Security Council, the permanent members of the Security Council, is to make sure that they keep their dominance. Now, dominating who? So they find it extremely very hard to say we are now bringing Africa on the same footing like us. Some of these things, by the way, are not given on a silver platter. I don't think that China, for instance, started getting all these things we see. It is getting positions on the Security Council, being not being ignored, the way Africa is being ignored, simply because it just asked. No. And China, which would ordinarily be supporting Africa, is also at the crossroad. Crossroad in the sense that they are looking at what it means to be a permanent member of the Security Council and bringing Africa on board with double power. What does that mean? That certain decisions which are not in favor of Africa will not any longer be taken the way they have been taken. But you see, when push comes to shove, what happens? You take a decision on an African country, Africa vetoes. And one country wants to do it alone, like maybe America. Say, I'm going to do it alone. Or France says, no, I'm going to do it alone. The Sahel region, I will pick maybe Niger and I will attack it. What will happen? Then it means that the entire Africa now will come and support Niger against France. And therefore we are moving into what? Third World War. So some of these dynamics must be appreciated at the end of the day.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think Ndugu Awich put it rightly, and of course many speakers have talked about this. Until that time that Africa can also possess an equal threat to the world that they will be had, like China did. But you also appreciate that if you put all the annual budgets of Africa together and look at what elsewhere the world, I'm sure, like Lumumba last time was saying, the budget of Coca-Cola alone is bigger than the East African budget.
That one I agree. Let me make my conclusion on the issue of what Africa therefore must do. The truth of the matter is that it is the Africa be getting admitted with especially that double power as it decided in Swaziland is not going to come so easy. Now, at the threat of not coming at all, what therefore should Africa do?
Exactly, that is the
Africa,
question.
at the end of the day, we must rebel. You see, this concept of rebelling is not necessarily evil. Some of these decisions must be taken to a point that if it means a fight, we put up a fight. Whether that fight is going to take a sizable number of Africans, after all, when have we not died? They are talking about the Jewish Holocaust. Africa, during slave trade, do you know how many people died? But history is not so kind to us. We must rewrite our history. But at the same time also, we must take a decision and say, look, as we decided in Swaziland, that Africa must be a permanent member, double permanent member on the Security Council. We must have it and we give it a time frame. Should it not happen, this is what we are going to do as Africa, as a bloc. Now, let us see what happens. Of course, you will say, but what can Africa do? Business out there will say, but Africa will be shattered just in no minute.
No, but
my friend,
that's not true.
Hamas or Palestinians have put up resistance. The South Africans put up a resistance and majority of them died. But ultimately, apartheid was dismantled. Yes, we have got some other forms of apartheid now, but it is not as it was those years back. In the same way, Africa must put her foot on the ground and say, by this time, this must happen. I know there are consequences, and those consequences include, but are not limited to death of some people. Economy crumbling. But somehow, there is mankind will reinvent itself.
Yeah, because, and Ndugu, Awich talked about it, I think in passing. Because if you are looking at, if you are to be hard, then stand to be hard, and there must be a reason as to why it should be hard. So Africa has to be hard, but it has to stand to be hard. You are not going to go to the UN, use your 15 minutes to talk what are you talking about? Because most of the African countries, their foreign policies are as terrible as anything. If it is there. But again, last time we talked about... They are
not taking us seriously. Let me also mention this. What we have to do when we put timelines and we seem not to get within those timelines, yes, diplomacy is very good. Negotiation is very good. But when you cannot negotiate forever, there has to reach a time when we shall say as Africa and probably other parts of the world also, which are also, like we say in the Pan-Africanism, we said that we have got the diaspora. Now, yes, diaspora is part of us as well. You go to the entire South America, you look at some of these Caribbean islands, and all these guys are actually us. But the point I'm making there is that we have to reach a time when we have put our timetable, the time limits, and those time limits, if they have not been respected by the people we expect to answer us back, then we say, okay, none of the African members is actually going for the UN. And
should that happen, like last time we talked about that, we will be more than half of the UN will not be there. And maybe then...
Of course, we have other extra members away from the African continent.
When we look, maybe sometimes we are just very hard on these people when they sit in the Security Council and take decisions which they are supposed to take, because they are taking decisions about Africa when Africa is not even there. But the wonderful thing about it is that we are just lobbying that they take decisions that will affect us positively. But you are saying that even the people who Africans talk of Russia as a friend in that African, I mean, in the Security Council, talk about China. But we have seen that when critical issues are taken, we are referring to Libya, that even these people who we think are friends don't do so because they also have interest in Africa. So do you think when these two positions finally, I'm sure they will be given it to Africa at some point, do you think that will give us a better headway in the Security Council?
Well, it may give us a better headway because I know in New York, for example, there's always what is loosely referred to as African position. But also remember that even when you have what you call African position, the states also have their sovereignty.
Exactly.
It's funny. For example, one time there was an election. An African position was that Africa had some candidates. There are always elections like judges. And I have been a beneficiary of one of the elections because the world wanted 9 people and I was a candidate and Africa had to support me to be one of the 9. But I was talking about this election that European countries, European Union has 26 candidates, 26 countries, and Africa has 54. there was an African position to front a candidate. You can't be surprised that when we went for the voting, it was only Europeans who were elected. Meaning that the Africans ambassadors would talk at African positions.
Exactly.
But internally, they're
both.
I don't even want, if I have to illustrate it. So we sat around and said, come on,
Well,
we had an African position to support a candidate.
Exactly.
And European Union have 26 countries. How did we, that
Lose
means
our
out of
position.
193 countries, if you remove 54, you remain with 140 something. But these European countries were getting more votes than that. So you can see that the African position can be there and you can use it to use the veto, but the sovereignty, we still need a lot to do among ourselves. I give another example which maybe would even sound more ugly.
A lot of whipping.
There was a position where East African ambassadors had a coalition of East African ambassadors. So one ambassador was not cooperative to the rest. They thought they would take a loose position of East African. So when the members were discussing, then somebody said that the other ambassador who was not cooperating said he went for a dinner and the European ambassadors organized a dinner for him and they told him that you are the African ambassador we trust. Then the rest said, hey, but they also told me. So what they do, they organize a dinner.
I know that.
They organize a dinner,
Divide and rule.
invite one ambassador for the dinner and said, you are the best African ambassador we have in New York. Then tomorrow they invite the ambassador of Malawi for the same dinner. You are the best African ambassador. Then the next. So this other one was moving.
As
that
the
they
best.
had invited him for a dinner was the best African ambassador.
was alone.
And they said, but they all. So it is until they discovered that there was this
they have all
diplomatic
been fooled.
maneuver.
Yes.
So this kills a lot of African Union position. And simple things like a dinner. Now, my friend mentioned about African position. That African position is actually called a Zuluwini. It is called a Zuluwini consensus. It was taken in a valley in Swati.
in
Swati.
There's a
Swati.
valley which
Yes.
is used for conferences in Swati, that is Swaziland.
Yeah.
So this valley was called, the African went there and make a position, and this position is known as a Zuluwini consensus. And the consensus by the African, according to the Zuluwini consensus, is that Africans need two positions. But what I want to say is that, having worked in UN for 8 years, UN is talking of underrepresentation by regions like Africa, or even a no representation in the Security Council. Underrepresentation, for example, Asia is saying they deserve more.
Exactly.
So Asia is saying they are underrepresented. Remember, in Asia, the bigger population of the world is there. If you averagely put Chinese at 1.5 and Indians 1.5, they take 3 billion
Exactly.
of the 8 billion people, or 9 billion of the world. So you already have 8 billion. For 2 countries alone, out of the 9 billion in the world, 2 countries take 2 billion, sweet, finished. Now, Asia is saying they are underrepresented. Africa is saying we are not represented. So there is no representation alongside underrepresentation. Therefore, me, what I was seeing in my little computer here is that true, new members will be brought on board as Security Council, Permanent Security Council. The result will be that other countries will continue to take unilateral decisions. Sure. They will feel their inferiority is diluted. They will feel their space is interfered with. So they will continue Or some dreamers may even think of constructing a smaller house above the Security Council. They may think, okay, Security Council is good, but they will kind of try to create another high command.
Apex.
Information. They can even now try to run away. And trust these whites, by the way. No pun intended. They can even try to run away because we have seen them run away from themselves. That the decisions that have been taken mainly in the Security Council, when it was not yet permeated, as they would want to call it, when they admit new members, are now majorly taken in NATO. They say now, it is NATO. You find that major decisions, even on affairs of Africa, are taken by NATO.
Yeah, sure.
They can do that, or they form something else.
So that is what I'm thinking, that should we bring in more members on this permanent seat who can veto, it will now make other members take unilateral decisions. Like, I mean, unilateral can be taken for good, but for example, in the case of Libya, did you know that when NATO countries decided to attack Libya, Germany, which was a member of NATO, said, no, we think this is wrong. It is injustice. Gaddafi doesn't deserve to be attacked. What Germany did is that they told the Americans, we are not going to send our pilots to bomb Libya. However, we agree unanimously that in Afghanistan, the war is against terrorism. So let us take our pilots to Afghanistan, bring your pilots there to replace us here. But we told Germany, said, but you have also fought then. Why don't you just refuse to replace them? That is what Germany did. Germany said, we are not going to fight Libya. We are not. If you want us to fight, we can fight in Afghanistan. Indeed, they swapped. The pilots who were in Afghanistan were brought to attack Gaddafi, and the German pilots replaced. These are some of the unilateral decisions you can make. Now, I was saying that this will happen. But also the other thing is, there's now a debate saying, if you bring other members of the permanent security, including Africans, they are now starting to qualify what should be used with the veto or the exemption to the general rule. For example, the other debates are saying, if it is a matter of genocide, war crime, okay? Genocide, war crime, and crime against humanity. If it is detected, then nobody should use veto power. They're not trying to bring exceptions to the general rule. Others are saying, if we are going to exercise veto power, then affected parties should not. This was mainly a debate from Ukraine, that if it is a war about Ukraine and Russia, then the participating party in the hostility should not exercise the veto power. Yeah. All these debates, in my opinion, the exceptions to the general rule are being brought in anticipation that new members who, in their opinion, don't deserve are coming.
Sure.
So, Security Council will therefore be weakened in a way. You are being brought to exercise veto power, but by the time you reach, you have no veto power to exercise. So the amendment is taken.
But also, I think you mentioned you didn't mention something which is very key, especially when it comes to the the Africans. You remember, even as the NATO were given a green light by the Security Council to attack Libya, the General Assembly also endorsed the resolution. But among the people who endorsed the resolution was South Africa that endorsed the Security Council resolution.
To attack Libya.
To attack Libya. So I think much as we look at the rest of the world as against Africa, Africa itself is not innocent to the problems that we have encountered and caused ourselves as you did put the issue of the ambassador who went around talking he was the best ambassador. That has happened a number of times. And you know, for me, and on this forum, I've always been very open, that when you are dealing with issues of Africa, you don't have to trust South Africa, you don't have to trust Egypt, you don't have to trust Kenya, and this another notorious country. Because at the
just
worst,
information there, just to get to know the Egyptian annual budget estimates, and particularly the defense budget, who funds it and by how much. Look at the interests of America in the Egyptian security vis-a-vis all the Middle East, and especially the helping out of Israel. You will get to know the mathematics and why some of these things happen. Look at the time when Gaddafi was attacked, and was it Jacob Zuma? Or,
yeah, it was Jacob Zuma, the president.
And how vulnerable he was, and what he owed the so-called some members of the Security Council, and why South Africa at that time never participated, because our own president, His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, by the way, is on record having said that he reached out to the leadership in South Africa and he was let down. He stopped it at that. That had he been listened to, they would have put up a force inside Libya that would have deterred, or at least would have denied the aggressors an opportunity to overrun the country and do the mess that we are witnessing in Libya. At the end of the day, I agree with you. When you say, look, Africa, we also have a share of our blame. It is true that we are not equipped enough. Individual countries take certain decisions not in the interest or collective interest of the organization as African Union, or even some of these regional bodies which we have established. Exactly. We choose, because we know there are no repercussions, to go alone. The sovereignty that my brother Pora was talking about. You see, we play that card, and our forefathers had seen that long ago. The Nkwame Nkrumah, may his soul rest in eternal peace, had seen that and warned in 1963 that, gentlemen, we must leave this conference with one army, one currency, one government, because I foresee a future where if we get comfortable in our little positions as presidents of our respective countries, we get used to being saluted, seated in the cars and being opened for. We are not going to achieve the African dream of one Africa, and one government.
And that's where
what we have to do, therefore, is that there has got our biggest problem, by the way, having overcome the physical liberation of Africa, is to make sure that we deal a blow. I know it is not easy, it is not a walk in the park of ideological liberation.
Ndugu Awich, as we wind up on this subject, we are not finishing it today, because in the next episode we shall still now look at the details of the workings of the UN and the UN Security Council. But for now, we will be winding up. So we'll have your closing shot on that.
My closing shot, first I want to comment on Comrade Rugarama's view about fighting. Maybe he will explain more in the next episode. But I am a soldier, I'm a major, and I know fighting. So I don't know where is the front line, and who is the enemy, and who is the enemy, where is the front line. I don't know who will attack first. But what I'm saying is that we may not need the confrontational front line. But of course, Africa should develop a sense of self-defense just in case you attack. But I don't think, because even the enemy is not clear as he's saying. So exactly. I wouldn't join his voice for calling for fighting for now. But what I'm saying is that even the permanent members have not rejected our call for security permanency. I have not had any opposition views, unless it is coming as a last minute. So surely the UN will be reformed. It has been a discussion for 14 years. And the reforming will be to the benefit of Africa. We shall get at least one and extend the non-permanent. We may get one and two more in the non-permanent, which would be good enough. So we shall get that. But we should only guard against the negotiations for the safety of operational system inside. Because once we are brought on board as permanent members, they are going to sift it to bring exceptions and modernate the rules of procedures in the General Assembly.
Yeah.
Because the rules of procedure is not very much catered for in the parent instrument. It is more easily revised. So we should cater for that. Therefore, it is known by the world that the UN needs reform. It has been discussed for 14 years now, and it will soon later come in favor of Africa. We need to now check ourselves. Because even if we're given one or two permanent seats, we shall again fight.
That's what that's what we shall be discussing
so
next time.
Yeah,
we adopted on the how to take it.
We should. But otherwise, the reform is long due.
Exactly.
And there is no opposing voices, even from the permanent members. You can hear the American ambassador. So it will come.
Those are liars, Comrade Pora. For 14 years, why have we been discussing it for 14 years? Does it take a decision? Does it take 14 years to reach a decision? They are not granting us, and the enemy is them. Those are the enemies.
Yeah, but
we already know the enemy.
You also have not shown that you must have it. So that's why it has taken long.
Do you want us to go and address ourselves in UN?
But you have never done it, and I don't think you
I think that should, if it will make us achieve that, then we shall do it.
And the viewer, thank you so much for being with us for all of this time. And next week, we'll again be coming with the same subject. Look at now the detailed dynamics of the UN and where Africa comes in and where it benefits. Of course, we shall not be undressing and Nduga, which has said, you know, the soldier diplomat sometimes.
I wish it was the truth. He's trying to be clever.
But that is what we could discuss today. I'm sure we'll also allow, I thought we'll have time to look at what you had, the views you had sending us for the sanctions, but I think we shall have time to look at that. We thank you for the time, and until next week, we wish you the best of the weekend till we meet again. Thank you.